Face it, shaker bottles suck. Your protein shake always comes out clumpy and you look like an idiot using the thing. That's why I decided to ditch my shaker bottle for good and get myself a BlendJet 2 portable blender. It makes perfectly blended protein shakes that come out smooth, creamy, and delicious in just 20 seconds. So go to BlendJet.com and use promo code DCASTPOD at checkout to get 12% off your order. That's promo code DCASTPOD to get 12% off your order at checkout.
Hello and welcome to the Deathcast, the place where the cool, creepy kids come to learn about their true crime. I'm your host, author, and journalist Ian Tott, and I'd like to thank you for joining me as we prepare to take our second relook at the West Memphis Three. Now, before we get into this week's case, as always, I have the normal plugs. If you'd like to follow the show on social media, just search for the Deathcast, Deathcast Official, Deathcast Pod, or Deathcast Podcast. You can find me on most social media platforms under any one of those monikers. If you'd like to help out the show, there's two ways you can do that. First is to go to your favorite podcast app, click on subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. Secondly, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/thedeathcast and donate to the show. No amount is too small, and obviously no amount is too big. Now that all of that is out of the way, get yourself a nice comfy chair, kick back, relax, close your eyes. I've got my coffee, I've got my cigarettes. Let's go into the crypt. Alright, so this week we are taking our second look at the West Memphis Three, and I got a lot of reaction to the first episode, quite a bit of it actually, from supporters of the West Memphis Three who like to throw out the old tired tropes about the evidence in this case being largely circumstantial. And my response to those individuals is quite simply, turn off the television, stop watching the docudramas, stop watching all of these true crime documentaries. The reality of the matter is, the majority of murder cases are solved using circumstantial evidence. The idea that DNA evidence is the be-all end-all to solve crimes is a fallacy, which has been perpetrated not only by law enforcement, but also by media, such as Hollywood, and journalists who have not looked deeply enough into the facts. Fact, in the last 5 years, while there has been a massive increase in the use of DNA evidence to convict offenders, there has also been a massive increase of cases being overturned because it has been discovered that the DNA was either improperly tested or incorrectly matched to an offender. Ergo, DNA testing, DNA evidence, while an extremely valuable part of any investigation, is not infallible. Just like any other tool within law enforcement's arsenal, DNA tests can come back with incorrect matches, which leads to innocent people going to prison for crimes that they did not commit, which is why law enforcement still relies largely on circumstantial evidence. And the amount of circumstantial evidence in the West Memphis Three case is exceptionally large, and you're going to see that as we really get into what happened after the crimes were committed. But before that, we need to continue on looking at Damien Echols in the months leading up to the crimes. The reason being, he himself, as well as the media, likes to paint Damien Echols in the light of the misunderstood teen who was targeted by Bible-thumping corrupt cops because he wore black t-shirts and was into what they considered to be Satanism. That is not the case with this case. Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miss Kelly were looked at because Damien Echols and Jesse Miss Kelly could not keep their mouths shut to people around them and insisted on dropping hints. In the case of Miss Kelly, he flat out told people what he had done, and this is in fact what led the police to look into them. When we left off last week, we were talking about how Damien had gotten himself in trouble for running off with a girlfriend and being found in an abandoned trailer in Lakeshore with the two teens naked from the waist down in a closet. Now, Damien ends up getting sent to a mental hospital for evaluation, as does the girlfriend in question, Deanna Holcomb. Numerous observations were made concerning Damien and his mental health while he was in the mental ward, and it was also noted that he firmly denied being a Satanist, insisting instead that he was into Wicca. While there, Echols was prescribed imipramine, and it was noted that he had a fairly average IQ, somewhere in the range of 101. While he was in this mental health hospital, Jerry Driver, a juvenile probation officer, was assigned to monitor Damien Echols. And eventually it was decided that because Damien's mother, Pam, had broken up with Damien's stepfather, Jack Echols, because of the allegations that he had been molesting Damien's younger sister. So Pam ends up hooking back up with her husband, Joe Hutchinson. And it's decided that Joe has a job out in Oregon, and he's going to take the entire family, including Damien, with him. This is fairly important as some significant events occur all around this entire thing of the family moving out of state. Now, the prosecuting attorneys, as well as Damien's probation officer, Jerry Driver, all agreed that it would be in everyone's best interest if Damien did, in fact, leave the state with his family. So his stay within the psychiatric hospital was cut short. Something else that is often overlooked is the fact that while at the psychiatric hospital for his first stay, Damien did in fact admit to having used speed in the weeks leading up to what transpired between he and Deanna Holcomb. Later, it would come out that Damien had also begun using the medication that had been prescribed for his migraines, and had also used marijuana on a number of occasions. Marijuana is a very low-level drug. It's not going to make someone swing into a psychotic episode. However, I mention it because it's part of the facts of this case. It should also be noted, too, that Damien, after being released from Charter Hospital first time, began huffing gasoline fumes. This, I imagine, in order to stop feeling the all-consuming depression that was upon him. This is not uncommon for individuals who have manic personalities to use and abuse various substances as a form of self-medication. Before we get into Damien's second stay in a psychiatric hospital, we're just going to touch briefly on how people in West Memphis saw him, particularly the youth of West Memphis. Damien went to great lengths to project this rather dark, brooding, mysterious, and dangerous image. And I imagine that a large part of this was in order to help cope with his depression, because he felt internally like nothing Outwardly, he wanted to project that he was something in order to get a reaction from people, because having a negative reaction to people for individuals such as Echols is better than getting no reaction at all. And Damien really pushed the envelope with this. We've already discussed the fights that he got into in school and the fires that he had allegedly set in the school as well as elsewhere. He was also very open about the fact that he was into Wicca. However, many people said that Damien was actually into full-blown black magic or Satanism. Now, this is all coming from students and other youth. This isn't something that parents were bandying about or that came out during trial. It was well known throughout West Memphis and Marion that Echols was involved in this type of thing. There were stories well prior to Echols having been questioned and arrested by police of Damien and others gathering in the woods outside of Lakeshore homes and practicing animal sacrifice. Some people are saying, oh, that's absolute bullshit, that's rubbish. The evidence doesn't support that. Months prior to the murder of the three boys, police had begun to find the discarded remains of animals in the woods and in other areas such as abandoned buildings, and they knew from past experience as well as training that they'd had that this more likely than not indicated that there was some form of black magic rituals taking place. Quick disclaimer: this stuff does happen. I'm not saying that these people are actually summoning demons from the pits of hell or elder gods, but there are cults who do practice animal sacrifice in secret. This isn't something that was made up by some, half-cocked Hollywood screenwriter or conspiracy theorist. This stuff has been happening in this country for decades and has been happening worldwide almost since the beginning of written record. Okay, a perfect example of this would be the cult that has been linked to by Maury Terry to David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer. Whether or not you believe that David Berkowitz was in fact a part of this cult, the evidence exists inside Untermeyer Park as well as in the canal that ran between Berkowitz and the car home that animal sacrifices were taking place. The bodies of dead German shepherds which had been ritualistically slaughtered were discovered. Similar things were found in the woods in and around West Memphis. Dogs having been killed, parts of their bodies cut off, obviously with knives. There was evidence of fires. Damien himself had numerous animal skulls inside of his room, one of which was a dog. And there were people who are credible who, after the fact of the murders, when talking with police, let it be known that they witnessed Damien doing some of these acts of animal cruelty. I'm not saying that every single person who came forward after he and Miss Kelly and Baldwin were taken into custody were credible. I'm saying that prior to the three of them being arrested, individuals did disclose to police that Echols and his cohorts were involved in some form of ritualistic black magic. People saw Damien stab dying dogs with sticks. He openly boasted of this fact to people. Others claimed to have seen Echols and others within his circle committing acts of animal cruelty during so-called rituals in the woods, wherein blood, urine, and or meat from these animals was consumed under the belief that it would allow those partaking to gain magical powers. The impetus for a lot of this, in fact, comes from Damien himself, in that going back at least until his early teens, Damien really went out of his way to let people know that he was into this type of stuff. I'm not talking about the animal sacrifice aspect of it, but that he was into what we are going to call a rather unusual belief system. Damien himself has claimed that he discovered a book on magic in the local library, and that upon reading this, it felt like he was, home, basically. He had found what he was destined for. As he grew older, he would express this to people in an effort to try and either shock them or put fear in them that he's not someone to mess with. Again, because it is better for people to fear or think poorly of you than to not think anything of you at all. And there's people out there who say, oh, that kind of stuff doesn't happen. Yes, it does. I was a full-blown Satanist from the age of 9 until I was 25 years old, and when I was in high school, I was very open about that fact, because it's better to have somebody fear you or dislike you over your personal beliefs than it is for them to think nothing of you at all. It stems from depression. This needing, this desire to want to feel different from everyone else, to be terminally unique. And it is more than apparent that Damien suffered from this, and again went to great lengths to paint this larger than life, dark and mysterious image of himself, because for a person with this type of mindset that is in such a deep depression, if you know the real me, you're not going to like me. So rather than let you see the real me, I'm going to let you see this concocted version of myself so that you at least have a reason for it. And that is because the individual dealing with this has such low self-esteem and has such a low sense of self-worth that they feel that they are worthless, so they have to project this image out onto the world around them. Damien was very open with this type of thing and very flamboyant in his manner of dress. He couldn't just wear a heavy metal t-shirt. He had to dress all in black, as well as wear a black trench coat and sunglasses, really trying to impress people, whether that was negatively or positively. And that has continued with him until this day. Now, getting back to the story, after getting out of the psychiatric hospital, Damien basically ends up dropping out of school in the 9th grade because he's unable to cope with life on life's terms. And this really just sets up a spiral within his life that we are going to see over the coming months get worse and worse and worse as Damien's behavior becomes more erratic, more irrational, and more dangerous. So Damien gets released from the hospital this first time, and then it appears that the family was looking to move to Oregon. His father, Joe, was back in the picture, and you do have to remember that Joe Hutchinson had basically destroyed his son's childhood by constantly moving and living under paranoid delusions that people are out to get and kill him. So I am almost certain that Damien was, beside himself trying to figure things out. He had also lost his girlfriend, which to the best of our knowledge was the first girlfriend that he had ever had. His whole life is in turmoil. And I want to clarify, I'm not picking on Damien for having gone through any of this stuff. I went through similar things when I was his age. I was a very similar type individual, in fact. However, I never murdered 3 boys and got convicted of it and then ended up getting out because Hollywood bigwigs got behind me because they thought that I was just too cool and liked my story enough to throw their money behind me. Damien did all of these things. Damien's life at this point is just in a complete uproar. Obviously, he's smarting from the loss of the girlfriend. He's having suicidal and homicidal thoughts, which are not being helped by his use of various substances or by the fact that he is really not getting any help for the problems that he is having. He's also dealing with a mother who is mentally ill, as well as a father who is mentally ill, and a sister who is just gotten away from the man who has been sexually abusing her for untold years. This leads Damien to going back into Charter Hospital because of the fact that he was having these suicidal and homicidal ideations. He was cutting himself, that type of thing. He ends up getting sent back to Charter Hospital, and it's actually his mother and father who check him out this time as well, basically letting him know that we are traveling to Oregon from here. According to Joe Hutchinson, during the cross-country drive, the family was going there because Joe had gotten a job managing a BP gas station. Damien was inconsolable in his grief and depression over the fact that he had to leave his girlfriend, Deanna Holcomb, who, if you'll recall from the previous episode, he had been forced to break up with by her parents, and the fact that he was leaving behind the life that he knew. Now, Damien's time in Oregon is not going to last long, and it's actually going to be more of the same. It's known that he had weaponry during this period of time. He'd had weaponry prior to this in the form of knives. He gets into Oregon. His father sets him up with a job working at the BP gas station that he is managing, and it's just not working out. Damien is his normal defiant self, and this eventually leads to some form of a confrontation. There are numerous versions of this story out there, all of which come from the Hutchinson family, and it's important to know that because this family cannot keep the facts of what's going on straight. One version is that Damien told his father that he was going to cut his heart out and eat it with a spoon. Another is that he was threatening the family with knives. Another still is that there was a brief argument and Joe Hutchinson went to his son's room and demanded any type of knife that he may have had, and that Damien had handed these knives over to his father without incident. To give you an idea of how wish-washy Hutchinson himself is on these matters, in the early 2000s he gave a testimony in which he stated, quote, "The altercations that was brought up as 2 different instances made in one. The first instance was I was afraid. He had a habit of shutting his bedroom door, had been by himself, and him being depressed as he was, and the medicine that he was taking, I was worried. I went into the bedroom, I opened the bedroom door, he did have a knife, it wasn't an altercation at that time. I asked him one time, hand me the knife, there was never an argument, never a crossword, he handed me the knife." Hutchinson then went on to discuss the fact that Damien had been discussing possibly killing himself using bleach and or a knife, further quoting, "I am the one who took him to the hospital, and the altercation that broke out, he did tell me he would eat me alive, but it was after I made the first move. He didn't want to be there, but he went there because I took him there for them to do observations on him, and at that time, and the way that I am, sometimes my temper gets the best of me. If you say just one little word, it would kind of tee me off, but it was my mistake. I'm the one who calls him to tell me that. He stood up in there and he said somebody is going to get slapped. Well, if anybody had to be slapped, I'd rather it had been me. I stood in front of him and called him names that I shouldn't have called him. I called him a punk, and I'm one. I can't. It's my fault. He did tell me that he would eat me alive, but it was after that. I'm the one who caused it. There are stories that Damien may have been imbibing on alcohol during his stay in Oregon with his family. We really don't know because, again, as with many aspects of his life, Damien is rather wishy-washy, stating at one point that there was booze, at another point that there was no alcohol or any kind of substances in the household for which he could abuse. Now, I know I'm going through things rather quickly. I am just trying to give a very brief overview of Damien's life up to this point. Later on, we are going to get deeper into things, especially when we start looking at witness statements and court testimony concerning Damien Echols. Another aspect of Damien's life that is kind of in the shadows is the reality of his love life. We know that he had been in some form of a relationship with Deanna Holcomb, that they had a sexual encounter on at least one occasion. Damien also was involved in a relationship with a young girl by the name of Dominique Tier. Now, Dominique seems to be one of those young girls who fell under Damien's sway, and whether just because it's how things turned out or she was just very easily influenced, she began to kind of, I don't want to say mimic Damien, but she began to take on some of his personality traits. Now, Dominique's the one who's going to end up giving birth to Damien's first son. So they did have some form of a relationship, and this is where things get kind of tricky. Some stories state that he was devastated over the loss of Deanna Holcomb in his life. Others that he was distraught over the fact that he had to leave Dominique Tier behind. Damien, in interviews, has stated that while he was in Oregon, he was making plans to have Dominique come out and visit him. And that's one of the problems with this case is there's so much that these people have said and then backtracked and altered and changed to try and fit their version of events. More probable is that Damien had been dating Dominique and then gotten into a relationship behind Dominique's back with Deanna Holcomb, which led to a breakup of some sort between he and Dominique, and then when the relationship with Deanna ends, Damien ends up coming back into her circle and they start going out again. I don't know, that's the best way that I can really piece it together, because Damien preyed on young, impressionable girls during this period of time. It's not something I'm making up. When we get into testimony and court records, you're going to see that these two young girls were not the only ones that Damien had encounters with. In any event, after he gets out of the hospital, according to Joe Hutchinson, he was in there 2 weeks. According to court documents, he was in there 2 days. It was basically decided that Damien needed to return to West Memphis. Remind you, this is in 1992. The boys would be killed May 5th, 1993. This despite the fact that his probation officer, Jerry Driver, had pretty much expressly forbidden Damien from returning to West Memphis. However, because his stepfather, Jack Echols, was still living in West Memphis, the family decided that Damien could go back there where he was less miserable than he currently was in Oregon and live with Jack. So the family buys Damien a bus ticket to return to West Memphis. At least that's the sanitized version of the story. The original version of the story is that Damien was known to have knives, was very possibly drinking in his room without his parents' permission, and in fact had threatened to cut his mother's throat, along with threatened to kill his father, when his father demanded that Damien turn over a sheath that held knives, which is what led to the altercation. Also, in the original version of this story, it was stated that the police had come to the house and removed Damien because of the threats that he had made against his family. And after being released from the hospital, he was told, "You cannot stay with us, you need to go back to West Memphis." That is in stark contrast to the version that I told just a moment or two prior, wherein Damien's family plays up that they were just concerned for him because he was really depressed. It is up to you, the listener, to decide which one of these two versions fits the way you view Damien Echols. Personally, I believe that it's the darker, less, caring family version of events, especially given what we know Damien was up to and would continue to get up to once he returned to West Memphis. The only real nugget from that we can absolutely 100% verify is the fact that Damien was bought a bus ticket and sent back to West Memphis, despite the fact that Jerry Driver had told him he could not return to West Memphis. And in point of fact, Damien was supposed to inform his parole officer that he had returned to town when he got there, something that Damien did not do. So Damien gets back to West Memphis, ostensibly to live with his stepfather, Jack Echols. However, Damien pretty much ends up living over at the Tier household, where Dominique and her mother live, along with Dominique's other siblings. Upon returning to West Memphis, Damien did tell people that a satanic priestess or a demon, something along those lines, returned with him from Oregon and had followed him the entire way. And it was Damien's belief that this priestess or demon or whatever it was intent on either murdering him or pulling him back into the cult. We hear that word again coming from Damien himself, telling people that he's probably going to get pulled back into the cult. Ergo, he was in this cult prior to being sent to Oregon. And I will concede that it's possible that Echols, as he was wont to do and still does, may have been telling people these things in an effort to make himself seem to be more important than he actually was. The problem with that line of thinking, though, is that there are numerous people who knew Damien during this period of time who have stated that not only did Damien participate in cult activities and tell them about it, they participated in these activities as well. So either they are all lying, sharing the same delusion, or Echols was being honest when he told people that he thought that he was probably going to get pulled back into this cult. So after getting back to West Memphis, Echols bounces around between his stepfather's home, some accounts have him living on the streets, and his girlfriend Dominique Tier's trailer with her mother. However, a few days after returning to West Memphis, Echols is noted as being in town by his probation officer, and very quickly sets about having Echols detained for violating his probation. So now Echols is in this juvenile detention facility, and this is a story that has made the rounds for years and is actually in various court records, While at this juvenile detention center, Echols was observed sucking the blood from a scratch that was on another inmate, which wound up getting Echols sent to isolation and placed under suicide watch. Upon learning about this, Driver decided that Echols needed to be placed in a mental health facility for observation, and was able to obtain a court order to have Damien sent to Charter Hospital. So on September 14th, 1992, Jerry Driver picks Damien Echols up from this juvenile detention center to drive him over to Charter Hospital. And while driving, the two of them have a conversation. And again, this comes from court records and testimony. Driver asked Damien about the incident where he was seen sucking blood. According to Driver, Echols tried to play the entire situation at first off as a joke or a misunderstanding, although the more Driver pressed Echols on this, the more his story began to change, with Echols finally stating that he had been drinking others' blood for many years, although he preferred that it was with a willing participant, which leads us to ponder whether or not Echols was trying to infer that this individual at the juvenile detention center was in fact not a willing participant. Echols also informed Driver that not only had he drunk the blood of others, they had drunk from him as well, most notably his various girlfriends. He also stated that by drinking one another's blood, they were able to gain power. In notes from this particular hospital stay, it says, quote, Damien's behavior has become frightening to community members in Jonesboro, had been suspected of witchcraft and or devil worship prior to incident involving arrest, again, thought to be suicidal, but not afraid to die. And this hospital stay was much like the previous. The individuals working at Charter noted pretty much the exact same things that had been noted in Damien's personality and behaviors on prior stays. He's released on September 22nd, with one of the provisions being that he will quote-unquote not participate in occult beliefs. In December of 1992, Damien Echols turned 18 years old. And he continued with this same pattern of behavior going into the new year, with one addition to his life in that he began actually attending psychiatric counseling. Damien also managed to get a part-time job doing roofing, which is actually pretty interesting when you consider the fact that, at least according to Damien, at this period of time, as well as all of the mental health professionals that he encountered, he was really incapable of having any type of employment. During these counseling sessions, Damien went over his childhood and basically said what I've already said, that he believed all of his problems stemmed from his early years and the interpersonal relationships within his family. But he also began giving hints as to what was going on inside of his mind, particularly talking about his occult beliefs and how he, Damien, was under the belief that he could steal energy from other people. Something that he would attest to under oath at his murder trial, where he stated that children have more energy to steal than adults. He also related that he felt that a spirit had been placed inside of him at some point within the last year, and that this spirit had decided to become a part of him, and eventually Damien had decided to become a part of this spirit. Other things that Damien admitted during these sessions is that he had grown up in an abusive household, that it did not affect him, as he was able to put it all inside. However, when these things that were inside decided to manifest themselves within his mind, he would quote-unquote hurt someone. He also seemed to take a lot of delight over the fact that apparently when he was in Charter Hospital on his last stay the previous year, he had been informed that he had the capabilities to be either the next Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, something he seems to have relished telling his counselors. An often repeated quote from Echols from this particular counseling session is, "I know I'm going to influence the world. People will remember me." Damien didn't help matters any in these sessions, as he would often bring morose poetry and morbid images that he had written to share with his counselors. Later on in January, Damien again spoke about the spirit that had joined him, claiming that it had actually become one with him a month prior, and that not only had the spirit become one with him, he and the spirit had decided to become one with each other. He further went on to elaborate that the spirit was that of a dead woman who had been murdered by her husband, and when questioned about how having this spirit inside of him made Damien feel, he stated that it made him feel more powerful. He also stated that this spirit would talk to him and that only he could hear it. Now, it could be that Damien was telling these people about this spirit in order to make the diagnosis of schizophrenia stick in his bid to get put on Social Security disability. But it is interesting that he brings hearing voices up again, as we know from prior stays at mental health facilities. Before the idea of getting Social Security disability was even on the table for Damien, he did let them know that he was having auditory and visual hallucinations. So it is very probable that he was in fact experiencing these things, just as it's also probable that he was informing his counselors of these things because he did not want to deal with the things that were happening inside of his mind. No person who has mental health issues wants these issues, and oftentimes, if they're given the opportunity to talk about and deal with their mental health problems, they will do so. So it's very possible that Damien was, in fact, being truthful with all of these mental health professionals. The other line of thought is that Damien knew that he was going to commit murders at some point and was therefore kind of paving the road for a defense by reason of insanity by informing these mental health professionals of this. The problem with that train of thought, however, is it's very mature for someone who is 16, 17, 18 years old to be able to think that far ahead and plan that far in advance for something that they are building themselves up to that is such a momentous and major life-changing event as is murder. So I don't necessarily believe that line of thought that he was preparing to commit the murders at this point and just laying groundwork to cover his tracks when everything was said and done. So over the next few weeks, Echols continued to participate in his mental health therapy sessions, where various things were noted, such as that he had cut himself on the right arm. And it should be noted that one of these cuts was actually the name of Damien into his right arm, and claiming that he feels very powerful. He also began to exhibit delusions of persecution, which is very interesting when you consider the fact that During his early childhood, Echols' birth father also claimed to have feelings of persecution, namely that people were out to get him and trying to kill him. Echols began relating to mental health professionals that he was being harassed and targeted by local law enforcement authorities. However, as we're going to talk about in a few moments, there's a reason that local law enforcement was targeting Damien Echols. He was not being a saint during these months. He also went deeper into his beliefs in magic, claiming that he was a Wiccan and not a Satanist. The individuals at Charter Health Hospital were able to help Damien fill out and complete forms for him to receive Social Security disability, which he eventually did get. Damien was put on 100% disability due to his mental health issues. This was in early February of 1993. And it's interesting to point out a few things about this application. He stated that he was too mentally ill to be able to work and function in society, noting his symptoms as mentally disturbed. When asked on the application what exactly his disability was, Damien put, quote, "I am going through treatment at the mental health center and have been in several mental hospitals," further noting that his conditions kept him from working because, quote, "When I try to take a time out, my employers don't like it. Violent medicine makes me sleepy, vomit, and headaches." On other forms as to why he had been hospitalized by stating, "I am a sociopath." Further going on to elaborate, he was homicidal, suicidal, manic depressive, schizophrenia, sociopathic. He gave these same reasons for the other hospital stays that he had had. This eventually got Damien 100% disability. The end of February, the entire family moved back from Oregon, and Damien began splitting his time between living with the Tier family and his parents, although he was forced to share a bedroom with his sister Michelle, and it was noted in numerous court documents that because of this, there really was no place for Damien within the house, and oftentimes either he or Michelle had to sleep on the couch. We're now going to go back to a part that I spoke about while discussing Damien's various dealings with mental health professionals. When I mentioned that he had been talking about feeling persecuted by local law enforcement, and I stated that there was, in fact, reason law enforcement was targeting Damien, and that is because Damien, who we've already discussed, was fairly well known and notorious throughout West Memphis and Marion, began doing things that were much further outside the norm for him that brought him to police attention. A couple of things to note here is that Damien was well known and recognized by his manner of dress and the fact that he always wore a trench coat. He walked everywhere as Damien did not, and to this day continues to not have, a driver's license. So Damien was going out with Dominique during this period of time, as we are well aware, but he could not get Deanna Holcomb out of his mind. And this led Damien to asking around about her, and he discovered that Deanna was attending a church with her family. So Damien took it upon himself to go to this church during Sunday service in the hopes of having an encounter with Deanna. And in his own words, "Scanning the rows, I saw Deanna sitting in the dead center of the room with her family. I couldn't breathe. She looked at me and looked away. I didn't even see a flicker of recognition. What did that mean? I had been expecting something, anything, but her eyes passed over me as if I was not even there. When it was over, I walked outside and stood on the sidewalk. I was trying to figure out what this meant as I watched her family get in the car and drive away. Now, a lot of this information I'm going to discuss here actually came to the public's attention after Echols was arrested for the murder of the three boys. However, these things that I'm going to talk about were passed on to police prior to the murders happening. On March 1st, 1993, Jennifer Ball, who lived in Lakeshore with her mother, contacted the police to inform them that a 14-year-old had threatened her on several occasions. According to Jennifer, on March 1st, she was at her house on the phone with a friend when an individual described as, quote, a slim white male about 18 dressed in black t-shirt, black jeans, and a black jacket appeared outside of the window to the trailer she lived in and began making threats. Afterwards, this individual walked around the back of the trailer and into the fenced-in yard behind the trailer. On June 10th, Jennifer again contacted the police to inform them that she had a name to go with the individual who had been outside of her home on March 1st. And in a handwritten statement, she said, quote, the first contact I had with Damien Echols was when he was at my window. I had heard about him and heard he was into devil worshipping, so was Michael and Amanda Lancaster. Well, Michael had told her that he was going to blow my house up and stay away from me. Well, she didn't believe him and we continued to be friends. Well, he called her one day and told her to watch out, that he had Mark Bashirs and Damien Echols watching us. All this was happening in March. About March 1st, I was on three-way with Amanda Lancaster and Jack Held. It was storming that day. I kept on hearing something, but I thought that it was just the rain. Well, I was in the kitchen. I was looking out the window, and somebody jumped in front of it shouting, you bitch, I'll get you, I'm gonna kill you. You're gonna die. I started screaming and hollering. I didn't know what to do. I dropped down in the corner of the kitchen. Amanda was hollering at me, Jennifer, what is wrong? Jennifer, what is going on? I told her that someone was at my window and it looked like Damien. She told me to stay where I was and she was going to call me right back. I hung up the phone. I looked out the window to see if Damien, was still there. He was. He just glared at me and said, you're dead, bitch, and ran off. I was so scared. Amanda called me back and I was crying. I told her what Damien had said. She just sat there like, oh my God. About 5 minutes later, she said, Jennifer, was Damien wearing pure black and a black trench coat? I said, yes, why? She said, he's walking down the street and eyeing my house. She got really scared and started crying, and then her house alarm went off. She was screaming and crying. I didn't know what to do. I had a feeling that Damien was going to be watching us and after us. When my mom, Teresa Woodson, got home from work that day, I told her what happened. She didn't know what to do. She waited for my stepdad, Don Woodson, to get home. She told him about it. He really didn't know what to do either. Me and my mom were talking, and she asked me to describe Damien. I told her that he had black hair and these eyes that looked black. He was dressed in a black shirt, black jeans, and a black trench coat. She asked me if he was tall. I told her yes. She said she remembered seeing him in Walmart. This was about 10 minutes after he had passed by Amanda's house and come up to mine. She decided to call the police. Officer Reese came to our house. She asked me to describe Damien. I did. Officer Reese, asked me if I was sure it was Damien. I told her no. I was scared that if Damien found out I told, he would definitely kill me. So the person at my window was left blank. Well, about a month ago, I was in Kroger. I had left my mother to go get something. While I was looking, I noticed that somebody kept passing by and looking at me. When I looked up, I discovered that it was Damien. I just ran off. I didn't tell my mom because I didn't want her to worry, so I let it slide by. About 3 weekends ago, I went skating with Amanda Lancaster. We were having a good time until Damien walked in. I looked at Amanda and pointed. She just said, oh my God. I told her I was going to go call my mom. She told me to just ignore him. She had told Amy Allison when the three boys first got murdered that Damien, some boy named Jason, had murdered him. Amy just ignored her. While me and Amanda were walking around the skating rink, we decided to go sit down and get something to drink. We were about 2 tables over from Damien, Jason Baldwin, and his girlfriend Heather. I don't know her last name. While we were all singing and having a good time, I noticed that Damien kept on staring at me. I just ignored it, or at least I tried to. I looked up and noticed that him and Jason were whispering to each other and pointing at me. Damien whispered something to Jason, and Jason looked over at me and said, "I don't know." Then Jason whispered something to Damien, and Damien looked at me. He looked me up and down and said, "Yup." Then Damien started saying something, and Jason kept on saying, "No, man, no." Well, we finally left that table and went walking around. We went to the back of the skating rink. I noticed that Damien had followed us. Not with his body, with his eyes. It was really starting to freak me out. My best friend Shannon Sanders was up there. She noticed that I had been acting paranoid. She kept on asking me what was wrong. I told her I was just tired. Finally, on Sunday, I told her what was the matter. I had lost Amanda and was trying to find her. I went to the bathroom to see if she had walked in there. When I came out, Damien was standing there against the wall. I bumped into him. I didn't realize who it was until I looked up. When I looked into his eyes, it's like I froze. I just stood there. It's like something clicked and I came back to reality and I ran off. His eyes followed me all the way to the back. I didn't really say anything to Amanda because I didn't want to get her scared. We stayed at the back for about 10 minutes and decided to go back up to the front. Well, some girl, I can't remember her name, I really don't know her, asked me to go buy her some candy and a Coke. When I went to give it to her, I noticed she was at Damien's table. I just ran over there, handed it to her, and walked off. I could feel his eyes following me. Well, I later found out that he was asking some people who I was. Some girl I didn't know told him I was Jennifer Ball. He sat there for a minute and then said, Jennifer Ball, I know her. I really, really know her," and had this evil look on his face. Then he started asking around what Amanda's phone number was and where she lived. No one would tell him. While we were walking out of the blue, Amanda started saying, "Shut up, shut up." I looked at her and asked her what was wrong. She said that she could hear Damien in her mind saying, "Bitch, you're gonna die, you know too much." Last year, Amanda had PE with Damien. She said he would sit there and enter her mind. It really freaked her out. Well, it was finally time for us to leave, and I was glad. Damien watched us as we went out the building. Ever since then, it feels like someone is watching me. Friday, after everyone had found out who murdered the little boys, I got a phone call. I answered the phone and someone asked who this was. I said, "Jennifer." They said, "Well, you and your friend Amanda were the next to die by Damien," and hung up. I was really freaked out. I didn't say anything to Amanda about the phone call. I had heard that Damien was going to kill 2 more girls, his girlfriend and a Jason Baldwin's girlfriend. Well, Jason's girlfriend is a girl named Heather, whom is Amanda Lancaster's cousin. I don't know her last name. Amanda kept saying, "Friday, I know those 2 girls were you and me." I knew they were. I just told her not to jump to conclusions, even though after the phone call I was certain it was us. After Amanda read that statement in the commercial appeal, she kept on saying, "I have a feeling our picture's in that briefcase. I have this weirdest feeling. I just wish somebody would find out." Then yesterday, some woman that had come swimming with my aunt told my mom that she heard Damien was going to sacrifice 2 virgins next. I told my mom about the mysterious phone call. She asked me how come I hadn't told her. I told her I thought it was a prank, but now I'm really not for sure. It's just really scary. No, I feel like everywhere I go I'm being followed. I haven't had any phone calls since Friday. Some of that statement can be chalked up to the overactive imagination of a young, early teen girl. However, other parts of it cannot be dismissed. It is known that Jennifer did in fact name Damien Echols on March 1st as the person that she had seen in her backyard. Jennifer's friend Amanda also gave a statement to police around this time, stating that she had been on the phone with Jennifer at the time that Damien appeared in her backyard. Also on June 10th, Jennifer's mother, Teresa Woodson, gave the police a statement attesting that it was in fact Damien who her daughter said had been in the backyard on March 1st, further stating that on her way home from work that afternoon, she had seen Damien walking down Balfour, and other young girls came forward. Yes, this is after the fact. Some of these statements, however, cannot be dismissed as simply the overactive imagination as children. Two girls stated to police on June 10th that they had seen an individual was outside of their house taking pictures as these girls prepared to go to church. They went inside and informed their mother that this individual was outside. The parents of these girls did in fact state that they did encounter an individual outside of their house squatting in the bushes, and that when approached, the individual, who was said to be wearing all black, got up from the bushes and ran off. Yes, it could be that the family did in fact see somebody outside of the home who was Damien Echols. It could also be that they saw somebody outside of the home who they did not recognize, and it wasn't until seeing images of Damien in the local paper and on television that they put two and two together. This does occur, and I will concede to this, that witness memory is a tricky thing. People will see one person, however, when an individual who was involved in another crime is apprehended, their mind will see that individual who was arrested and superimpose them over the image of the person who actually did it. That isn't to say that is the case here, only that it is very possible that may have happened. We are going to call it at this point. I hope you have enjoyed this second installment of the West Memphis Three Redux. The Deathcast is a production of Corpse Creek Publishing in association with Big Pond Podcasts. Until next time, stay morbid.